Today, we'll take you for a walk through Res from two perspectives. First as an end user, and next as a systems admin. Now, we're going to use 2024.03 release of Res, which came out in March 2024. If you're watching this after May or June 2024, you should check to see if we've pushed out a newer version of this talk. Now, first thing to say is that Res integrates with your enterprise-wide Active Directory service and your existing identity management system. That means that as a user, you can access all of the resources using your regular login, just like you would normally. Second thing to say is that Res is a web portal, and pretty much everything you do with Res is done through your web browser. That includes the interactive desktops. Now that may sound weird, but it's really cool. I'll show you in a minute. If creative types and video editors in Netflix can use this same technology for their day-to-day work without getting grumpy, well, that's a high bar, and we're pretty sure it'll work for you too. Now let's jump in and log into Res as a day-to-day user so that you can see what a scientist or engineer will see. In the top left, you'll see the name of your Res system. Your admin can customize that, and we'll show you that a little bit down the track. Down the left side, you'll see a few tabs. Let's work from the bottom up. The SSH instructions are there to give you a cheat sheet if you need help getting SSH sessions open to the machines you spin up in Res. Now, Res is a visual tool, and for 99% of what you do, that'll work just fine. But we know R&D folks just prefer to use SSH for command line work, and so we've accommodated for it here. That's why these details are there. The file browser gives you access to your home directory through your web browser. Clicking once on a file selects it, at which point the menu in the top here becomes active, and you can do things to the file using those buttons. Double-clicking on a folder opens that folder, as you would expect, and double-clicking on a file will attempt to open the file in the editor in the browser. This is super useful for checking job parameters, inspecting output from a job, or just making minor tweaks. You can favorite a folder or a file, so it's easier to find later amongst the zoology of your file system under your Favorites tab. You can also upload or download files through the file browser too, but HTTP isn't the most performant protocol for heavy-duty file lifts up to the cloud. That's why under the File Transfer tab, we've hidden all of the instructions and cheat codes you need to connect your storage with applications on your desktop like FileZilla, WinSCP, or AWS Transfer, so you can move much larger payloads of data back and forth efficiently. Now, the top two tabs here, they're the real business of why you're here. This is where you can find your virtual desktop sessions and interact with them. Under My Virtual Desktops is where your personal desktops live. These are Windows machines, some of them are Linux, and we support quite a number of Linux flavors already. CentOS, Red Hat, and Amazon Linux, just to name the first three. You'll notice that you can already see a thumbnail of the desktop. That's a live shot, by the way, so if there's something dynamic happening in there, you'll see that there too. For desktops that are currently stopped, you'll just see a blank screen. Now there's a few other things going on here. You can connect to your instance just by clicking on the connect, and that'll open a new browser tab with a secure encrypted DCV pixel streaming desktop in your browser. Let's say that again slowly. This is a virtual desktop made up of encrypted, secure stream of pixel data that's being pushed backwards and forwards between your browser tab and the servers in the cloud that are running your instance of a desktop. Yes, that's weird, but it's awesome too. Now, it uses our own streaming protocol, a thing called DCV, which is very clever at adapting to the unpredictability of internet traffic conditions. And it does such a good job at this, it's unlikely you'll notice any lag or sluggishness. That is, unless your kids are hammering the internet at home with their PS5. We can't really help you with that. It's called parenting. Now, if you want to get this desktop session out of your browser, you can download a thing called a DCV session file, like this. And then you can run that using your local desktop version of the DCV client. And if you don't have that already, just go to this menu here to find the links and download it. The DCV client lets you do things like full screen the experience, and your GNOME desktop inside your Linux box or your Windows desktop, they'll just automatically resize to adapt to your screen. So if you're like me and you have a very nice 32-inch 5K monitor at home, you can do that with your cloud desktops too. But you can still do all of your work happily in your browser tab. But if you, like me, you're a doofus and from time to time close one too many browser tabs by accident, it's not a big deal, because the virtual desktop still exists even if you don't have a window open to it. That can be handy if you want to kick off some very long-running things on one of your desktops. You can easily close your laptop lid, jump on the train or in the car and go home, and things will still be computing away in the cloud while you're commuting. You can control the state of your desktop from here too. Most of these are kind of self-explanatory. Stopping an instance means what you'd expect, everything stops. You should know that it's not truly gone until you terminate it though. Just be careful any data you need is stored in your /home or on one of the shared file systems, or you'll be crying into your coffee or beer. I can actually recommend beer for that kind of crying. Now, we can also schedule changes to your desktop state, and that means you can have your virtual desktops come and go according to your work schedule. It means you can honestly walk away from the office and not have to remember to turn your desktops off. And last but not least, you can share a desktop. Now, sharing in this sense can mean sharing a read-only view, or, a little more adventurous, sharing where you've both got control of the keyboard and mouse. We recommend only doing this latter kind of sharing with people you trust, and most importantly, people who won't cause you to need therapy when you argue too much over who's got the mouse. That shared desktop will show up in your colleagues' Shared Desktops tab in their Res window, and it works exactly the same way there. Now, let's look at Res from the admin's point of view. Clearly, there are more menus. The first set under the desktop section, exactly as before. But let's start with the dashboard, since there you'll get an idea of the concept Res works with behind the scenes by checking out the metrics it's gathering. Res works on the concept of a project, a real-world activity with a goal. Curing cancer maybe, designing an aircraft wing, or predicting the lotto numbers. Do let me know if you cracked that last one. Projects can have resources allocated to them, mainly software stacks which your users will use to launch sessions. And a session is a long-running instance of a software stack. On the dashboard, where you can see which projects have active sessions fired up, if you don't see a project mentioned here, they don't have any active sessions running. Software stacks are built from Amazon machine images. We call them armies, but they carry a few extra properties. Those properties just flag the need for GPUs perhaps, maybe storage requirements or memory needs. They'll limit the instance types offered to your users when they're wanting to spin up a new session. We say that you register an army to form the basis of a software stack. If you want to, you can have several software stacks based on the same army, but called different things. Large and small, graphics and no graphics, depending on what guesses you have about what your users might need. Like I say, you can use the same army, but put different values for things like GPUs, memory, and storage. And these stacks can also contain instance profiles and customer security groups too, so you can tailor each one of them to the security posture it needs. Now, the last thing we should mention is that you can augment each software stack with custom bootstrap scripts, much like you can do with parallel cluster nodes. In fact, we can go one step further and we can show you a few tricks so that you can set up parallel cluster login nodes as res sessions. But now we're just showing off. Crucially, software stacks can be made available, or not, to specific projects. That means you can have a stack which is a comfy operating environment for your CFD folks, and you can make it available as a resource to projects that need it. And it'll be invisible to projects that don't. Now, the last piece of the puzzle is how users and groups relate to all of these. We mentioned already that Res uses your enterprise AD server to define who users are, what groups they're members of, and what their passwords are. We didn't want to duplicate any of that. Once you have projects, you can assign users or groups of users to those projects. So the wing design project can have the entire aerospace department assigned to it. But the secret special wing design project might have the users spelled out individually because we'll need to know. You can mix individual users and named groups of users in these project settings. From this dashboard, you can see right away that projects have codes. And if you dig inside a project, they also have budgets. Now, these budgets are defined in the AWS Cost Explorer inside your main console. Some of the projects listed here are over their budget. The real-world consequence of this is that none of the users in the budget can spin up and add any additional resources until the budget issue is cleared. Now, that could mean that the budget limit gets raised, or maybe everyone waits for the next billing cycle on the first of the month, so the cost tracker resets and we start the project again. But in practice though, our experience is that by giving teams and admins visibility of the progress meter as they go along, they can see how quickly or not they're consuming, and most people will manage their own usage. Finally, let's talk about some of the inner workings, because admins need to know about this stuff. The Users and Groups tabs are there so that you can look up users and groups, but we'll remind you that they're defined in your AD server. Res isn't a place for editing users or for creating them. That's what Active Directory and maternity wards are for. Res just imports them when your AD defines them. Now, that's good because it means that when people leave the organization, their Res access is cut off in the same way that their access to email or payroll is too. Now, the File Systems tab, this is where you onboard existing file systems or ask Res to create a new one for you. Res supports Amazon EFS, which is an NFS-based lifeform, along with NetApp ONTAP and Lustre, both provided by Amazon FSx. When you bring a file system into Res, you need to specify where it's to be mounted in the global namespace. That keeps it consistent everywhere, but sadly, it also removes an opportunity for admins to torture and confuse their users. Yeah, I know. The Snapshot tab does what it sounds like. It lets you take a complete system-wide picture of the current state of Res's environment and all its settings. This does not snapshot the individual EC2 instances though, the ones running people's desktops. This is for capturing the configuration of Res itself. The environment status tells you which modules you have installed and what the state is of the Res infrastructure that makes Res, well, Res. Gives it Riz, as the kids would say. In the General Settings tab, you can see the values of things like subnets, VPCs, ADs, and lots of other things. Most of these were set and forget choices you made when you installed Res, so they're not changeable here. One of the things you can change, and we recommend you do so, is the name and subtitle for the Res instance itself. Partly this is so that you can make it your own, but it's also super important if for some reason you're running more than one Res instance at your site, which can make perfect sense for compliance reasons for regulated data, for example. Finally, and I think we're running out of menus now, when users go to share sessions with each other, you can define what options they have for sharing. That might be because, for example, you just can't allow for sharing a desktop when the primary owner of that desktop isn't there. Or you might just insist that view-only access is the only kind of sharing you'll allow. You can fiddle with all of this in your Permissions Profiles tab. And that's Res in a nutshell. It's early days for Res. We're still adding features all the time. So if you don't see what you're looking for, reach out to us and find out if we're already on it, or perhaps to become the customer we're working backwards from for the next big thing. We'll see you in the cloud.